Welcome to New Business in Later Life, where we prove that it's never too late to pursue your entrepreneurial dreams. You will meet remarkable individuals who launch successful businesses over 50, sharing their stories, challenges, and enthusiasm. Your host, Ildiko, is a former social housing professional, textile designer, and teacher who described herself as a life artist. She is now a property professional, business network host, and facilitator of the Entrepreneurs Club. Subscribe now to hear these inspiring stories every week.
Today I'll be speaking to Chris, who I met at a recent Pitch and Procure event. I was talking to a lady, telling her about my upcoming podcast, and she pointed to a guy next to me saying, "Ooh, you must speak to Chris." As we were shaking hands, we were promptly called into the auditorium to sit down. Although we duly sat next to each other for the whole day, having got about as far as introducing ourselves to each other, we never got the chance to talk anymore on that day. However, as he was indeed the perfect candidate to be interviewed on New Business in Later Life, I jumped at the opportunity and invited him for a recording day. I, for one, had a very educational experience conversing with him. I deeply appreciated the way he explained the difference between mentoring and coaching. As these two words are generally mentioned side by side, in my ignorance I had no idea about their fundamental differences. But as you know from my accent, English is not my first language, so in my head these two words were synonyms. I now invite you to come and listen to Chris's story and expert skills in this episode. Hi everyone, today in the studio with me I have Chris Humphries from South Devon. Chris, welcome to the show, New Business in Later Life.
Yes, thank you very much.
And without further ado, please tell us what your newest business is.
Yeah, so it's Voyager Executive Coaching, and it really works with individuals or teams who are looking to unlock more potential.
Awesome. And how old were you when you set up this new business?
So it's very recent, so I was a sprightly 54. So,
oh, wow. Awesome.
Yeah.
So would you like to tell us a little bit more about this business?
Yeah, so basically it really draws on my love of coaching. So I trained as a coach in 2006, but that was after quite a while of doing sort of leadership development and outdoor education. But then through different changing career, I then ended up really going into developing wider teams, eventually director of people, etc. And then really developed this love of coaching, could see the power of it, and then started implementing it across multiple organisations, which is great because then you actually get to see, other teams becoming trained and then them having that approach as well. But now I'm in the lucky, fortunate position that I can now spend the next 6 years deciding whatever I want to do. So I've decided that I really want to do this, to meet my kind of passion and just do it the way I want to do it. So it's really about now starting off my business so I can have the clients I want to work with in the hours that I want to, etc.
That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Fulfilling your life.
Yeah.
So what's the 6-year
So yes,
bracket?
in 6 years, my wife and I will start sailing around the world.
Sailing, you said?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Yes, there's another passion. So sailing. That's one of the companies called Voyager Coaching because it's
Makes
about
sense.
going on voyages, and I do that every summer. So this last summer I sailed from Plymouth to Stockholm and back. So it was a 7-week odyssey, so that's really good.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason for having my own company, is I get to dictate, when I go away, and it's I think it's important to have goals and achievements that you're setting out for, and that really translates into the work and living out what you actually believe and do as well.
The question that's going around my mind is, why on earth do you want to wait 6 years to do it?
It's logistical because we still have our youngest child still 14, so so she won't have come out of university, etc., for another few years yet. So it's really waiting for that.
That makes
time,
sense.
and then we're free to head off in theory anyway.
So you think? I mean, here I am 50 and my dad still calls me his little girl. So yeah, that will never go away. Awesome. So have you always been in corporate positions? Is this your first business, or have you had other businesses?
So right at the very start of my career after I left university, I did work self-employed, but that was only for short term, and that was actually as a boat builder, again connected to my sailing. Okay. So, but it was after that I then started, joining the kind of leadership and management, and then working my way up through across different sectors, charity, education, etc. So it's been a varied career, but there's truisms. Once you're in leadership and management, I think whichever area you are, there's it's obviously quite transferable. And I certainly found with the coaching, because I use solution focused, and it's very what I call pure coaching, where I don't act as a mentor, so I don't tell people what to do. It's very much about helping them to see the way through for themselves. Obviously, it helps that I've got that experience,
Yes.
and directorship and CEO, etc. But actually, I'm a passionate believer in you start where people are, because the basic premise of solution focused is that I'll never be you. I'll have never had your life experiences,
Yeah.
and so therefore I can't come in and tell you what to do, because it's about you and your journey. And that's not to be confused with wishy-washy, oh, you've got all the answers. It's actually really part of a process where you teach people how to coach themselves, and then eventually they can
sounds really
unlock their own
interesting.
potential. So, which is, for me, it's a one-to-one relational that I really, really thrive on.
Could you tell me a little bit more about what's the difference between mentoring and coaching? You said something that kind of caught my ear, that with mentoring you kind of tell people what to do, and with the coaching you guide them to find themselves.
That's right. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so mentoring is more about where you use your expertise. So I might say, okay, so I used to be a director of people. I'll come in, I might be working with you as a HR specialist, but actually you really want to learn about particular areas, and I can impart that knowledge to you and maybe advise you on what to do, etc. But the issue with that is, well, from the coaching point of view, the issue with that is that can be really effective as a short-term intervention, because it brings somebody's skill level from, whatever level they are, to very quickly up. But what happens is once you get to the end of that period, it's then the person is left. It can be quite kind of dependent on the advice. So they feel like they don't really know what to do until they've consulted with, their mentor. And you have to be quite careful not to end up with a dependency established. Whilst with a coaching, it's more about I'm working with you, and it's not so much technical areas of expertise. It's more about developmental, so personal developmental. So it could be you're going to step up to a leadership position from management, and you're really quite concerned about how you can let your teams become empowered to actually take on responsibility without you trying to micromanage them. So then the coaching will look at, okay, so what have you done already? What works? And actually a little bit more deeper, because of when I did my masters, I did quite a lot of psychology in that as well. So it's about understanding the dynamics that are going on. So something I might use might be like the drama triangle, where so generally it's played out that there'll be a rescuer, a victim, and a persecutor, and so sometimes it's recognizing that you might be playing one of those roles, and they're quite interchangeable. So, but the research shows that it's quite a well-established theory from back in the 60s. But it's been updated and kind of further researched. But it's really helpful not to say to people, oh, I think you are this, but say, look, here's some information, and I give clients quite detailed kind of further reading, and then they can look at it and go away and think about it and come back, and then they might say, well, actually, do you know what? I've realised I'm absolutely the rescuer. I'm always diving and going, no, I'll help. I'll do this. I'll do that.
Okay.
And actually that disempowers the team. So then it's looking at, okay, so what could you do to let that go? What could you do to step away from looking to rescue people? And then we then coach on how actually you can use different approaches to switch that dynamic around. So the person then...
Yeah, so you identify the personality.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's one thing to identify the personality, but then is it hindering the work?
Yeah, all of it really is about building emotional intelligence. So it's about, so if we want to understand personalities, we might use a variety of psychometric tests. We've all done sort of various ones at different levels, to sort of Cosmo, right through to kind of quite highly effective but quite expensive ones. But they can tell you about how you work as a person. But the value I see in those really is it's good to understand yourself, but it's also really good to, and probably more importantly, to understand other people, because the conflicts and the dynamics at work can really change when you suddenly realise, oh, that person, they're not being really annoying because they're just coming up with all these ideas and they don't know how to actually put it into practice. When you realise actually they've got massive creativity, and what they need is the support to help them to transfer some of those really creative and far-flung ideas into actually maybe the new direction your company's going to go. And so it's about then changing your mindset and helping that person, but also it works the other way when they understand that you're the, say, like the detail person who's really going to be, focusing on the details. So then what you get is this synergy where people start understanding and then they draw closer.
Understanding each other, each other's personalities.
Yeah. And
gosh, that's so much, and so many things are going around my mind. Like, let's just take a step back to the mentoring bit. That is so interesting what you said about mentoring, because I often feel that, I can do a whole lot of things and stuff, but then have these blocks of how do I move my businesses forward, and I need a mentor, and I'm thinking, okay, it would be really good if I could just sit down with someone for an hour and make me or help me see how I can put certain things into practice, and suddenly that makes a lot of sense that a mentor would then give me like a to-do list, more or less.
Yeah.
Or just sort of highlight that, you could do this, you could do that, you could do that. And then I would then go away and find out which is best or which one I can do best and get on with it. What would be your approach to stop me, for example, trying to get that to-do list to move my business forward?
Yeah, so coaching would look at what building on strengths. So they would look at which areas. So something I use is Clifton Strengths Finder. So it's run by Gallup in the US, and it basically helps you to identify what your key areas of strength are. So it might be you're all about visionary ideas. It might be you're all about relationships, or it might be about other areas of 34 different types.
And I suppose it's hard enough for a coach to keep all that in your head, never mind the client.
Yeah, well, they come up with a very detailed kind of sort of guidance on what areas you're going to excel, etc. So
how do you approach that?
So I would look at, what are the strengths that you've got, and then look at, okay, so we know that you've got particular strengths in these areas. So, and then I'll say to you, so how is that going to take your business forward? So if you're really great on networking, relationship building, how can you use that to take the next steps forward? Well, I'm going to really look at these areas, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to use my skills to, excel in making the connections and what's the business plan going to lead to, and then coach you through that. It might be it's really about other areas, in which case you might say, actually, I need to recognise that maybe those strengths, I need to bring some expertise in to kind of help build in those areas because they're lacking. It is the right thing at the right time as well. So with mentoring, it can be a quick acceleration to say, yes, you at the moment, you need to do this, this and this, and that will get you there very quickly. But it is relying on that person's judgment. Hopefully they're a great mentor based on their success and experience. But with the coaching, it's more about helping you to develop those skills. So if you're, when your strengths isn't particularly about networking, but you've got to get out and do that, coaching will be more beneficial, because rather than a mentor saying, you need to get out and you need to do X, Y, and Z, a coach will say, okay, so you've identified that this area you want to improve in. You feel nervous, you're not sure what to say, you don't know how to start the conversation. So then we could, as a coach, you would then relate that back to, well, tell me about a setting where that isn't the case. In the family setting, I feel, very relaxed. Okay, so what's the difference? And then you can start working through different techniques to eventually you take what you know in the family situation into the business situation.
Yes.
So now you can say, okay, before I go in, I'm going to just spend a minute or two just thinking, okay, I'm going in to see friends and family. People are going to be warm. I'm going to work, I'm going to pick on one person that I might know in the room. I'm going to start with them, and then I'm going to, work my way up to the next person, etc. Or I might arrive a little bit earlier so that I'm not faced with a whole room of people.
Yes.
So actually I'll be super early, and then I can build on that technique. So you work out whatever's going to work for that person. So then when they go there, they can then, report back a week later and go, it was great, or I made this step, but then that didn't go so well. So then we could look at, okay, and then you work your way through. So you're helping to build that person. So I guess in answer to your question, it's different tools for different jobs. So if you want to know what's the next step, I want to go from here to here to here to here, find a great business mentor and learn from them, and they will guide you through that. But if it's something which isn't quite so, it's not so much about the technical steps in the process, it's more about you overcoming something which is blocking you or holding you back, then that's probably more about coaching.
Fascinating. So how do you help people, because I think obviously we are our worst critiques and we don't necessarily realise our strength. It's very hard when someone tasks you to write down your strengths and what you think people think about you. It is super difficult. But then it is so easy to listen to someone's story and say, oh, this is what I'm doing. And then, oh, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? With an like as an outsider, it's so much easier to give some kind of advice or guide people. But when it comes to you, it's super difficult
Yeah.
to really identify your strength. Even like here I am 50, starting up new businesses, I still find it difficult, even though I'm fairly self-confident and that kind of stuff. How do you guide people through finding themselves and finding their strengths?
So I think for me, it's part of that coaching journey. And I guess my greatest joy is people who they learn about coaching. I will actually teach people coaching techniques, because this isn't about me holding a piece of information. I'm going to guard that, and it's it's technical expertise, and I'm not going to let that out. I want to empower people. So part of my real mission is, at the basis of everything, is about helping people. But the way I want to do that is by helping them advance through coaching, but then helping empower them. So a client I have at the moment, we're about 18 months into our coaching journey, and what we're doing now is he's now going into his workplace, and with his teams he's starting to use coaching language, because he's seen the power of that really help him, and so he's buying more businesses as he goes through. And now he's going into the workplace, and we're talking through the conversations. He's then, using the correct language to then empower his teams to move them from kind of dependent to independent. And again, there's lots of different business models which we can use to help show that journey. But at the moment, we're really focusing in that particular area on helping his team to just basically get on with it, so he doesn't need to be there, and they can make decisions. And so that, it's really about empowering and trusting people. And yes, they will make mistakes, but actually think about when you were in a job, in that first time somebody gave you responsibility, how did you feel? You might have felt a bit trepidatious, but actually you also felt a bit like, well, if I make a success of this is going to look good, and it's going to make me, feel really good. And
it's important to empower people to do good as well as make mistakes, and then put those mistakes right and learn from them. I mean, we are in business. We know very well that we can fail our way to success, can't we? And I suppose in a corporate workspace, it's viewed very differently. I mean, my personal experience is that I've worked in the corporate world for many, many years, probably a good couple of decades. It's very hierarchical, and it could be quite unpleasant occasionally. And then I left that, and then for 10 years I didn't really have a job as such. I did various things to just help me along, live my life the way I wanted it. And then I got into business recently and started networking a lot. And the business community is incredibly supportive. I've never, ever envisaged anything of a kind. So obviously, as an independent business person, I kind of imagine you experience similar things, and then you pass that on. So then that leader that you are coaching will then pass that sort of culture back onto their team.
I think it's borne out through the evidence, and when you look at some of the top end companies, they are really embracing coaching, because as a mindset, it's so transformational. So I'll give you an example. So if you have a hierarchical, normal corporate model, so it may be in a more staid corporate, should we say, then you may well have performance management where you've got your objectives, they've come down from the top, your area's got the objectives, and then you're going to have a performance management meeting with your employee, and then you're going to say, I want you to achieve this, this, and this, and this, and this is your targets. But if you switch that around to the coaching method, you then say to your employee, that you're line managing, what are your aspirations for the year? So we know that we want to, as a business, we're trying to aim for this goal, because it's always rooted in where you're going. This is not just like, what do you fancy doing for next year? So, but here's our goal. On your best day, what would it look like with you working at 100%, achieving amazing and blowing that target out of the water? What would that look like? Oh, I would be doing this and this and this. Okay, so what can I do to help you to get to that place? Oh, well, actually, I could really do with some training on this and this and this. Great, okay, let's put that in place. And then when you switch it round, suddenly as an employee, you feel invested because you're being listened to, you've got a voice, and actually you've got dreams. And as a manager, you've now got a team of people who now are no longer thinking, okay, I've got to do what I'm told, and here we go through the annual cycle, etc. Now you've got, I'm really looking forward to this, because I'm going to showcase all the stuff that I've done last year and how amazing that was. And now I've got even bigger dreams of where I'm going to go to in the next year. And that is a whole different mindset, and totally transformational.
That's awesome. So going back to your actual business, so is it quite literal, like executive coaching, meaning that you coach executives in companies who will then coach their teams.
Yes, yeah. So it's really about, it could be the corporate clients who are looking for individuals to be coached. So they might have a pool of coaches who they pull on, because a lot of it's about matching. So making sure you've got the right person coming in to coach, which is going to fit really well with the person being coached. So once you find that match, you then have like a three-way contract. So between the employer, who's like effectively the sponsor, so they'll be paying for the fee, but then what happens is they might outline areas. And often it tends to be in things that are harder to approach in performance management. So it might be about increasing their confidence in areas, etc. So it might be that they've recognised themselves that they could do with some extra support, or it might be they've realised that actually, they are trying to cling on to things too much, micromanaging, etc. So rather than using formal process, what they can do is then say, actually, we've identified this area. And rather than having two specific targets, it's just like we're going to improve confidence levels, etc. So you can present at conferences and command more from the audience. It might be, for example. But then what happens is the conversation that I have with the coachee as the coach, that's within the realms of confidentiality. So right. I won't report back to the company on exactly what was happening, but what we do is we establish metrics at the start. Right. So then we can, because I'm really keen that we can show that there's a good return on investment.
Yes,
that if a firm is going to put that much money in, they need to see something coming out of it. So it's then about, so working through, so what's it going to look like? It might be we do like 360 surveys or questionnaires, etc. Or it might be some other way that we're looking at that can, that fits with the coachee, that they don't feel that's too far out of their comfort zone. So establish that. And then we can measure it again after the coaching, after 3 months. And then hopefully we're going to see that, now they are able to present more, they're now doing more events, they're able to maintain eye contact more with the audience, etc. So whatever is the measure that we're going to use. So then you can go through that process, and then ideally they actually report back to the sponsor to say, look at the amazing progress I've made, I've come from here to there. So it's an interesting relationship. The other way it can form is with groups. So sometimes it might be a series of people, that might be as a team they're going to move from, let's say, like management up to leadership. And so then you might have a team day, or it might be individual coaching around what that really means, and then working with people as individuals or as groups to then help and facilitate that as well. And then the other type of work as well is that sometimes it's about just pure facilitation. So it might be a one-off, come in, do a piece of work for a day to help a team formulate vision or values or other areas. So then they can really get to grips with that, and then that's it then.
I remember sessions like that when I was working in the corporate world. Yeah, amazing. So a lot of it sounds like it's very, a very personal kind of journey to people, but then how do you prove it to the sponsor that it's beneficial for the company? Also, I mean, it sounds incredibly complex from your point of view, coaching coaches and coaching leaders.
I make notes as I go through, which again I keep for myself, but there's also a reporting process as well, and that can be quite interesting as well. So so it is complex, but I think for me that's why I really enjoy it, because I really like things that are intellectually stimulating. And when you're listening to somebody, you have to listen really, really carefully, but also at the same time, you're also looking for what I call flags, where you recognise that what somebody said, you kind of think, okay, that's interesting. Why would they say that? And in coaching, you try to stay a little bit away from the why question, but sometimes it is useful to then explore a little bit more, to then sort of delve into, well, why is it that you feel, that this is a threatening environment, say, when you're stood in front of multiple people. And sometimes, and again, it's not about tracking back in a pure psychology way, but sometimes there are incidents which you can then recognise to then say, okay, well, that was then, but let's work forwards now. What can we do to change that, to rethink that? So I find that really fascinating, because sometimes it might be like transactional analysis area. Sometimes it might be about talking about vagal nerve, etc. So there's all sorts of different things that are really useful, but only in the right context. So it's not trying to put people into boxes, but it's sometimes going, okay, this could be useful. So let's talk about the drama triangle. What do you recognise of yourself in being played out in this, or other theories as well. And And so to be listening to the person, to be thinking and open to the possibilities is really fascinating. And the greatest joy at the end of it is seeing people, they say, well, you just really simplify things. And I come out and it was all, when I came in, it was a mess and I didn't know how to get forwards. But now I've got 2 things to focus on next week. And then you look at them the next week, because it's really important to review and set targets and to look at progress, because it's always about moving forwards. And they come back and go, amazing, it worked and it was incredible. And you go, yeah, but who made that work?
Like, yeah, I know it works.
It was
That's
you.
my attitude.
Yeah. So just
Cool.
great, really empowering, to see people develop like that.
You kind of touched upon it a little bit, that you were coaching and leading. And did I catch a word like you were a CEO of a company at one point?
So acting CEO and director of people, etc. Yeah.
Well, when was that aha moment in your life when you thought, okay, I've had enough of being a corporate, I'm going to go alone?
I think for me it was actually the financial freedom. So I ended up where I did have enough money to really spend. It is a luxury, but I do have that ability to spend the next six odd years doing whatever I want, really. And
when you say luxury, do you mean being self-employed being a luxury, or
no, having the finances behind me to enable me to not worry about receiving extra income whilst I get the business off the ground. So yeah, because I think if I was trying to do this and working at the same time, it'd be really difficult, because in my particular job, you have to network hugely. Like I'm probably nearly every day, 4 days a week, I'm out networking.
amazing.
So it's a lot
to
of
find
making,
clients.
Yeah, to make those relationships, and even the people that you meet at some of the network events, often they won't actually be your clients. It'll be the people that they refer onto you. So they'll say, I met this guy, at an event, I think he'd be really good for you. You should contact Voyager Executive Coaching, and then you'll get approaches through. So, but sometimes people do come to me directly and say, I want you to come into our workplace and come do some work. So it's difficult. You never really know. So.
Yeah, so is it when people would research if there was a coach around who could help them, and then they find you and find your description?
I think that's part of it, but I think it really comes down to relational side. So I think it's all, my perception at the moment, bear in mind I've only been going sort of 2-3 months now, my perception is, people won't just do a Google search. Okay, let's look at coaches, let's see who's there. Okay, I'll pick the top 3. I think people want to know you've got credibility, that you've got something behind you, and they want to know your reputation, and ideally have you recommended. So I think it's all about making those networks, getting those connections, and then eventually reaching the specific people that you're trying to reach. So for me, it's either the leaders of a business, or it's like the head of people or the HR lead who's really going to have that requirement and knows the value of coaching, because quite often they tend to be coaches themselves. So then they'll say, okay, right, we can talk the same language, and then you can have those meetings and make those relationships.
So we already touched on that you coach coaches. How do coaches kind of interact with each other? Do you have any power struggle, or do you have a lot of understanding, or how do people who are already coaching take your advice on how to coach or what to do?
Yeah. So the interesting thing is I wouldn't give them advice.
Okay.
So through coaching, you know that I'm not going to tell somebody how to do something or advise them how they should. So what we do is it's very understanding. So as a coach the power of coaching. So if you've got somebody saying to you, so if you're a coach, I'd be saying things like, what's on your mind at the moment? So what's the challenge that you're facing at the moment that you want to coach on, and how can I make this next an hour the most useful to you? So then you would then say, you say something like, actually, I've got this client, I'm not quite sure how to approach this and this and this. So I think what I would be really good to focus on is how I'm going to actually overcome that, and what I'm going to do going forward. So I'm ready for the next time I'm going to meet them, because I've had these challenges. And then we would talk about, okay, so what has worked? What are the things you think you need to research more? How will that help you? What's that going to look like in the meeting? What questions do we have to ask? And so you ask all those questions. No, at no point am I saying, I think you should do this and this and this.
Right.
So it's always about asking those questions that are really open to enable the person to really think. And then some of the questions are they kind of really stop you in the tracks. So you kind of say, well, what's the one thing you'd have to change to make that successful? and then like, Yeah, okay.
You really need to whittle it down to...
Yeah, I've going to have to, and that's where the power of it comes into, is because it's not just like, I'm going to ask you some questions. It's about really insightful questions that get to the heart of, what's the biggest obstacle in this process for you. Yeah. So questions like that really get people to kind of go, oh yeah, and what would happen? What would it take to remove that block? Oh, well, I'd have to change my behaviour. I'd have to do this now. Okay, so what was the first step? What one thing could you do tomorrow that would change that? Or what would people notice if that changed? What would people notice? What would your client notice when you're coaching them? So all of these questions are really designed to help people to move and to visualise and to move forward. So then they've come up with it themselves. So it's never about me telling them what to do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Let's put that in practice.
Okay.
Here I am interviewing you, helping our listeners who are thinking about starting a new business in the later stage of their life, like we have done. So, stopping or hindering you in becoming more successful in your business, having started up a few months ago, what sort of difficulties are you still finding in growing your business?
So for me answering that question?
Yes.
Yeah. I think for me, probably just the time it takes to network and how much of your time in the day that takes. So it's and also the emotional draw of it as well. So when you go and you're doing a networking event, because sometimes it might be 2 in one day, and you literally by the end of the day you're absolutely exhausted, because every time you're trying to give quite a lot of yourself, because you do feel a passion. I think it's important for people to feel that passion, but the end result is it can leave you quite drained. And then the time that you're going to spend on, okay, I need to get this ready to send out, I need to target these people, I need to, some of that can get pushed to the edges a little bit.
And I suppose there will have to come a point where networking will need to start dropping off as you gain more and more clients.
Yeah. And I was talking to a coach the other day who was saying that, she's found that as soon as she looks back, and realises she's got a bit quiet. Oh, well, what did I do in the last 2 to 3 months to build that pipeline? Oh no, actually I didn't do very much, and that's why. So
dropped off networking kind of thing. That's very interesting when you can draw such a clear parallel between something happening and something not happening.
Yeah.
Similarly, what has been the easiest thing in setting up this business?
I think for me, the particular model, the overheads are really low. So I can, because I go into people's workplaces, because I prefer the one-to-one coaching model. But also I have a house where I'm lucky enough to have a really nice office, and we had built a few years ago just before COVID, so it's like really timely. So that also is a really nice environment. So if I am doing stuff on the video calls, then I can, I've got a good backdrop, etc., and a comfortable place to work. So as a result, I haven't had to have outlay anything in terms of property. Also, I'm not at the stage now of actually employing anybody, because at the moment it's all about me. But what I am doing is building a network of other associate coaches. So that's part of how I'm kind of building a support around the business, so that I end up where other people can come in if I'm successful in securing some of the bigger contracts where we might need 4 or 5 coaches. Then I've got those people that I know and trust and have established a relationship with, and run a network together with them, so that then we can actually take on the bigger pieces of work as well.
That is so important, isn't it? Collaboration. And I think that's another thing that has really come through the business networking, is that we are not competition. We are all colleagues, and we all help each other. And when there are opportunities, it's not going to be right for everybody at the same time. So we can all take our little chunks.
I think as a coach, and in particular, that really runs true, because it's very difficult to have basically a mindset which is actually, I want to empower you and help you, and I want to be part of your success, and turn those same feelings to, and I'm really against the other person who's coach. It just doesn't work. Like, you've got to believe that all coaches, provided they've got the training and the expertise, etc., and the skill set, they are going to help people. And so therefore all you can do is say, well, I might not be the right match for you this time, but actually this person might be a really good match. And I think if I can get into a position where through my company I can do that kind of matching, that will help build my business, but also make sure the right people connect with the right coaches.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good business plan, doesn't it? Are you looking to grow your business in that sense, where you...
I think so, yeah. It's early days at the moment.
Would you even employ other coaches, or you would all work on
initially it would be through associate work, but yes, eventually it could be that I start running a larger company. But I'm also mindful that I'm not in my 20s or 30s, and there is, I think I can imagine it taking a fair while to really build up to that. And because I've got this definitive goal of after 6 years, I want to, do the next
retire
chapter.
and just sail.
Yeah, then, and with Starlink, that is a possibility to carry on my business as I go around the world with the satellite communications. But no, I still feel I'm going to give it my best shot in 6 years. But yeah, wherever I get to at the end of that, I'm also going to probably say, well, that's great. I'm now going to move on to the next chapter, really.
Yeah. Would you be able to sort of grow your business almost like a solicitor's firm? They have partners, so they sort of come through the ranks in a way. Obviously, they need money to buy into the firm as well. But then I'm not awfully familiar with how a solicitor's firm is, but that was the association I made in my head.
Yeah,
there are partners who run it, and then there are other solicitors and trainee solicitors, and then of course you've got all of the support network of the admin team and the HR team and accounts and all the rest of it.
At the moment, it seems to be coaching is really appreciated and kind of part of the culture in, say, like the bigger cities like London.
Okay.
So you would see coaching businesses that are big enough to support that, but certainly in the southwest, we're still a little bit behind the curve.
Like 10 years.
Maybe. So firms aren't necessarily seeing the benefit to the point that, there's demand for huge coaching companies. So quite often they're built on the associate model. So it'll be, people might have their own businesses, be working for themselves, coaches, but then be affiliated or associated with other firms so that when the bigger piece comes in, of work that comes in that can then be spread out amongst wider coaches. But I am also looking at the franchise model, so that is interest as well. So
you develop your own system.
So you end up with, this is how you start, coaching successful kind of business. And then eventually, if it's successful enough and you've got the credibility, then you could actually franchise that and have that in starting up in different areas in the country, which if the demand rises, then it could be really well placed. But
well, I'll tell you what, that's when you can make real money, when you start to sell that knowledge. I sort of know it from the property world that those people who may have made a lot of money from property, but once they started up their training company, that's when their income has rocketed. So there is, if you want to make an awful lot of money. And I suppose you've got generations below you, you've got children, and they all have children, so you can think about generational wealth. Once you start selling package that up, then that could be quite a
and I think
way forward financially.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in you may not necessarily go that direction, but for me, I really want to have the information and the details. I've had meetings already with firms who operate the franchises, because really I don't want to find out in 4 years' time something I should have known in year one. So I was very clear about, there's no way I can do it now, but what do I need to know? What do I need to work on? Think about the scalability, think about really recording the steps you took and really systemizing, which again is one of my strengths, is really, boiling it down to these are the steps, this is the systems you employ, and this is how you can grow this. So if I've got that in mind now, I can then build that body, that manual, etc., to create something which is worth something. So then if 4 or 5 years' time, it's fantastic and I'm at that stage, great. And if I'm still just...
You can sail off into the sunset.
Yeah, that's all fine. So
I think there's a really important message in there that I would really like to highlight, is that you've had an idea and you are seeking out bits of information. So you're laying some really solid foundations that you can build on over the coming years. So I think in business, that's very important to make sure that we've got that knowledge base to build on. Otherwise, you just sort of we've had a similar kind of the opposite experience. Although we've built some knowledge, but then it's like, let's do it. But then of course when you do it, that's when you really learn. So for us, this past year in our property business has been nothing but a learning curve. But I suppose in a way we can look at that as the foundation, but we are learning it through practice. Rather than prior research, but it's just one of those things we are learning all the same.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can I just sort of go back to a point that we kind of touched on a little bit? So in my network, and I run my own networking event as well as go to quite a few networking events myself, there are a lot of coaches around here in the Southwest. How do you find your own So we said that you are not competition, you are colleagues essentially, but still there are so many coaches, and I suppose they all offer something different, but still, how do people find you or choose you over and above somebody else?
I think, again, it's about relationships. I think I'm a firm believer in accreditation and having that validity, because I was talking to another coach and she was saying, she's also been coaching for the last 20 years or so, but she was saying really with COVID, a lot of people, they just stepped back from their work and thought, actually, I want to do coaching. And so there does seem to be an awful lot of people at the moment. Because I've been coaching since 2006 and done the Masters, I'm happy in my kind of like, I know what I'm talking about. And I've got that practice and many, many years of coaching. But it's interesting seeing the new people come through. But some of them are obviously really embody the spirit of coaching and that idea of, you're not going to tell people, you're not going to mentor them, you're going to really develop them and use a lot of techniques, because there are really good training courses and accreditation schemes that mean that you can, within a year or two, be brought up to quite a reasonable speed, and then you're building your practice. But also there are a lot of people where they can just set up as coaches and they don't need to do any training, and
I was actually going to ask you this bit. So what do you need in order to become a coach or a mentor? Or is it kind of a similar path to become either or the other?
Yeah, so the reality is you could literally just set yourself up and say, I'm a mentor. Now if you've got no business experience and credibility, that's probably going to be quite hard for you to get off the ground. But if you are a fantastic business person and you've got huge amounts of experience, you may well already have that network and be able to legitimately come in and say, yeah, I've got these systems, I use this process, you should try this, I'm going to tell you what to do as a mentor. And so you've got this, there's a whole range of where people could be coming in at. Some people will have accredited, like, there's various mentoring accreditation schemes, the same for coaching as well, because they are, separate things on the whole. There's three main bodies for coaching. But again, whether or not an employer would actually look to see whether or not they are accredited into this scheme or that scheme, I don't think that's actually widely followed. As long as there's something that backs you up, that's the main thing.
When do you feel most alive, most energized
Absolutely.
in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm in front of somebody, because I really love the face-to-face stuff, I'm much more. I much prefer being face-to-face with somebody, because you can read the body language and you can really get alongside the person. So I think when they're making those realizations, when they come up with something which you just think, wow, I never would have thought of even suggesting that, and that's incredible. And that for me that's my love of coaching rather than mentoring, because if I mentor somebody, I'm just going to tell them what's in my mind, and that may not be, anywhere near as what amazing they're just going to come up with themselves. So I think when you just sit there, you have that quiet, you have to be quite brave as a coach, because you ask questions and then you don't say anything, because otherwise you're just jumping into that space. So you've just got to drop that question and then just let them grapple and wrestle with it. And sometimes those waits can be quite long, but then they'll come out and you just think, that's incredible, that was amazing. And they'll come back the next week and go, yeah, I did it, that really worked and it was amazing. And it isn't from what I said, it's from what they said. And yeah, for me, that's where I'm most alive.
You mentioned about your workspace. So a few years ago, you set up your little office. Were you still working for a company at the time? So what made you?
Yes. Yeah.
What made you set up an office? Were you already thinking that you want to go independent?
Not at that stage, but I think I just recognised it would be good, and I think it was just one of those circumstances, but happen chance really, that it just happened that because my wife was working, and then when it went through COVID, it was all absolutely working from home as we all were.
So did you do the office before COVID or
before
during
COVID? Yeah, it was literally just before. So
then
it was just perfect, really.
So what made it now the best time to set up this business?
I think just having that luxury of not having to worry too much financially. So then just thinking, I've got 6 years to do whatever I want to do. What could I do that I most enjoy and my strengths really lie in? Because I talked about the Clifton strengths earlier. So my top one is relator. So it's about somebody who really wants to form deep, meaningful relationships with people, that gets a lot of joy. So when I have friendships, they're very long friendships that lasted for many, many years. And it's the same business that you end up connecting with people. And I just really want to help people as really the basis of what I'm doing. So it's just a joy when you have those relationships, like I was saying about another client, 18 months, and he's now looking at buying his third business, and it's just fantastic from where he started to where he is now. And for me, that there's a massive joy in just seeing those people develop and grow through their own
It's such an achievement
energy.
to your client as well as yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
So do you normally go into people's offices or just stick with your office, or have there been any really quirky places where you conducted business?
No, it tends to. So my preferred model is to go into the workplace, and normally they're big enough businesses that there's a room somewhere that we can go off and have some time in private. So because it can take hour to hour and a half for a session, so you're talking reasonable investment and time, and you don't want to be interfered with people knocking on the door and sort of trying to get things signed or whatever. So it tends to be the agreement that it's a private, quiet space, not going to be disturbed. So that's been most of the times. I have done a few coaching sessions in cars before, because going in the car park is the only way that people are going to get away. And that's quite interesting, because the dynamic is you sit side by side. And so certainly for coaching with other male kind of clients, it's quite good, because when you sit side by side, you don't have this kind of often intense eye-to-eye contact.
Is it better or worse for a
It's different. Yeah, it can. If people are really uncomfortable with the sort of sitting too close face to face, then side by side is actually quite an effective technique sometimes.
Yeah, you don't have that intensity of looking into someone's eyes. You can just sort of look into space and just sort of come up with your own thoughts and get lost in your own thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what kind of really interesting stories or reactions have you uncovered?
I think it's interesting. One of the things about coaching is that you have to be careful not to stray into like the counselling side. Okay. And there is quite a fine line sometimes between that, because it might be so a client might say, we've got an employee who's presenting with some issues around, it might be they're really struggling to put things into action, and they're not delegating to their teams. Can you do some work with them? And then when you work with that client, then privately in that conversation as coach and coachee, it then comes down to the fact that they were never put in a position of trust. That actually something happened a long time ago which really eroded that.
Well, like at work or even in their private life?
In their private life, it tends to be. Sometimes it can be work life as well, but often these things, tend to be some sort of event that's happened. And that's where you have to be careful, because sometimes if that's around something which as a coach you're always trained on when to recognise those signs. So it's always knowing when to draw a line and say, actually, that's an area which I think you probably need to go and get professional help with. And that's not a coach, that's going to be a counsellor, or some sort of psychotherapist who's going to be able to really help unpick that. Because if it's some sort of deep related trauma or some severe incident, then that's not what coaches are trained to deal with. We can kind of get close in terms of, we might identify that, there is some sort of trauma back there, but you're not then going to say, I want you to relive this experience, and that's not what coaching is. So coaching is about, okay, we're not going to ignore it, we're going to recognise there is some sort of traumatic event, and I really encourage you to go away and to have further help with that. But actually what we're going to do is we're going to look at strategies of how we're going to move on from that place to apply that into your workplace now. And so that starts a coaching scheme. And sometimes you might have somebody who's going through counselling and be coaching them at the same time. And again, it's about really being clear on where that line is, really.
Wow, it must be quite difficult for clients like that. Because then obviously, I suppose, if somebody's not performing at work, then highly likely that it's deep-rooted in their private life somehow.
Often it
Unless
can be.
It's just such an unfortunate situation where they just really don't get on with their boss or team or...
Yeah, and sometimes that can in an ideal world, that can lead to a wider dynamic where you can actually start talking about emotional intelligence in the wider settings. So then you might talk about, let's do some psychometric profiling with the entire team, and then do some work in helping them to understand. Because sometimes you recognise as a coach that actually this person they're an outlier. They're the person who's a really different personality style from everybody else. And actually they're not being valued necessarily for what they're bringing to the group. Because in an ideal group, you've got lots of mixes. Yes. If you get an imbalance, so you get lots of people who are really leadership and in terms of, there's another model, ColourWorks, which I've done a lot of work through before, where you might have a lot of red leaders who are really like, we're going to do this, and very directive, which can be really good, but it can also be way over the top on a bad day. And if you've got an imbalance,
not really empowering for the team.
No, so if you've got somebody they're far more relational, so they're far more down the green side in that particular model, so they far more want to be valued and to have those interactions. They don't want to be told, today you need to focus on this, this and this. They want to be asked, how was your evening? Like, how did it go with your daughter at the prom, etc. That means a lot to people when they're coming from the different approaches. So sometimes that piece of work ends up being with a wider team, so actually you can get that level of understanding and the ability to relate and move more towards the middle. So many of these models are like axis. You often see this sort of crosshairs. I'm on this one and you're on that one. But the important thing is you understand and you start moving towards the middle. And it's when you're in the middle that you can be all things to all people. And when you think of it, some of the best leaders are those people that, they do have time to ask you about how is your dog after when it got, into an accident or whatever, or they are really helping somebody to find the detail about something, or they are really coming up with inspirational ideas or relating to the person who's coming up with that. So they're reaching out in all the different ways to enable them to actually connect, which isn't some sort of manipulation. Sometimes you can think of, I'm just being manipulated because that person knows that I'm, a relational person, so they just ask me. But actually it goes beyond that. It's like, well, yeah, they know that, but that means they can now talk your language. That's not manipulating you. That's actually crossing the bridge to reach out and make sure that connection is there.
Yeah. So do you offer that as part of your remit to coach teams as well?
Yeah.
Which one do you prefer, the personal, the individual, or the team?
The personal is my preference. The team, it can be sometimes a bit more of a performance.
Okay. For you?
Yes.
Like
So what I mean by that is your dynamic is now much wider. So now instead of it being really, intense, relational, targeted, it's now all these people are expecting something. They've paid for me to be there for the day. They want to come out with something. They want something in the hand, something that's tangible. You can
have to have all the
skeptics.
bells and whistles.
Yeah, you can have skeptics. That's a load of nonsense. Why am I having to sit here? I should be at work doing this. And you'll have people who are really open to it and people somewhere in between. And you've got to hopefully come out where everybody goes away and they've got something from it. Yeah. So you end up having to perform a lot more and to meet all those different personality types and showcase what you're talking about as well.
What's your trick to sort of get the cynics to agree that this is more important to be here than to sit at their desk answering emails?
I turn it around and I say, so in true coaching style, I say, what will make this day the most useful for you? So that when you come out at the end of the day, you've all got something tangible. So, and sometimes that might be they write it down and give it to me. Sometimes we'll just talk it as a group. But it's about trying to say, so even if you're
voicing
skeptic,
is quite important, isn't it? Because once they say it out loud, then everybody hears it. Then it's easier to put it into practice during the day as well.
Yeah, and sometimes you can hide behind words as well. So if you've actually got to sit there and go, well, I think this is a waste of time and nonsense, then it's like, okay, so you're actually saying it out loud. Okay, now I know where that voice is coming from. But most people won't actually do that. They'll just be like,
too British.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such an interesting story. So obviously you've talked about coaching and leading for many decades by the sound of it, your entire career. Here you are at 54 setting up your own business. Do you at all feel too old for this? Do you have a little voice in your head that tells you that you're a little bit too old for this?
No, I don't. So cool. I don't know why my outlook is like this, but in some ways I don't feel any different from when I was in my 20s or 30s. Okay. I think physically I might be slightly having to accept that at the gym these days. But no, and in fact, I was talking earlier about being tired. And my wife said to me, she said, well, do you think it might be that your age? And I was like, what? And I don't know. I'm a firm believer in you are what you think you are. Yeah. So if I start thinking I'm a bit old, no wonder I'm tired, I shouldn't be doing this, maybe I should cut. You're talking yourself into lower performance and feeling old, and before you know it, you'll be sat in a chair and just watching daytime TV. So
on the flip side of it, don't you think that retiring at 60 is too young?
if it depends on what your goals are. So I found this before. So I've wanted to sail around the world for probably 20 years. So I've had 20 years of saying to people, what are you going to do when you retire? Have you got something amazing? And they'd be like, well, I don't want to retire. And he's like, well, what do you mean you don't want to retire? And it took me quite a while to realise a lot of people's lives and their success and just what they love doing is built up in what they do. And that can be a positive and a negative thing as well. But there aren't that many people who've got a definitive, like, yes, when I finish, this stage of my life, I'm going to go on to the next stage, which is I'm going to do all the traveling that I didn't do when I was in my 20s. Right. I'm going to compete in ultra marathons. I'm going to, and these are real things that people are doing, like I'm going to row across the Atlantic. Like there are people with really big objectives, but that's often because it aligns with their personality style. So if you're the person who's an achiever, who really wants to go for success, who wants to set themselves almost impossible goals, then it's far more likely you're going to have something in your life. But of course, not everybody's like that. Yeah. And for a lot of people, it's like, my biggest goal is going to be the best grandparent I possibly can be. I'm going to be there every day. I'm going to be picking up grandkids. I'm going to love watching them grow up. And for them, that is just as big and just as important as somebody who's got possibly a superficial goal of I'm going to sail around the world, or I'm going to do whatever. And I feel that sometimes that maybe that's slight selfishness of actually I want to do this, but I think, well, I've waited long enough.
I kind of feel like I just want to do amazing things in the world now.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer, the different stages in life. For me, it's always been your youth is about developing and education and leading up to, the start. Your working life, you're going to set out and achieve whatever goals you're trying to achieve. But at the end of that, I think you've got to have that third stage where, for me, it's like, I really want to go and do this big achievement. I've got other goals as well, and I really want to share the time. And yes, I will do the whole grandparent, should that happen, thing. But yeah, it's a time for different things, really. So
do you want to do your sailing just leisurely, or do you want to race or beat a record, or have you got something set out for yourself?
Probably leisurely, although I'm thinking of doing something called the Azores and Back race, which is a race from Falmouth out to the Azores, so islands out in the middle of the Atlantic, and then back. So that would be quite a good challenge, because I do like challenges as well. So,
cool. Is your wife on board with the sailing?
Yes, she is.
That's nice.
Yeah, no, she's a keen sailor and a yacht master as well, like myself. So so she's very skilled and able.
So to sort of come back to business a little bit, you've already mentioned that the best part of it is that you didn't have a lot of investment to make in order to set up your business, and you're quite happy to go along at the moment as a sole business person. But is there a power team around you that you absolutely rely on to help you run this business?
Yeah, so I think my wife is very supportive, and that's super important, because if I didn't have that support, that would be quite hard. Or
is it the emotional?
Yeah, probably more of that.
Things,
but also the financial support, because she's still earning, which
enough.
Just helps. It's not an issue. So there's that side, but then I've also got good business contacts as well. So I've got a close friend who's running his business, and so that's been really helpful to kind of bounce ideas off him. And then his work colleague as well, or sorry, his business partner. His business partner is also very experienced and able to. We've had several meetings where he's able to impart a bit of advice, because I've got no problem.
Sounds like a bit of an accountability partner thing going on there.
Yes, I think so. And it's helpful to have that as well. But just to have somebody that you can bounce ideas off and talk about, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about that idea? I think it all helps. So I think it's that village idea, isn't it? Of you're part of something bigger. It's not just you heading out by yourself. So can
I ask what industry your wife is in?
So she works in public health. So and that might be something we think about bringing to the business in later times, once we've got the initial main thing kind of set up, really.
Yeah. So what I was trying to get, do you talk to her a lot about your coaching business, or you find that your friends, long-standing friends, are more of the sort of accountability?
Yeah, probably from the business friends more so, because they have got that experience of the business sector rather than necessarily the public sector.
But it kind of, I suppose, helps with your private life that you are able to move the business out of it. It becomes a little difficult, just draining, I suppose, because we've got a property business together with my husband. And then, of course, at 10 o'clock at night, we could still go, what about this? And it's like, at what point do you draw the line
Yeah.
that I don't want to talk business after dinner kind of thing, but then
Yeah.
sometimes we just have to. So that sounds like a nice little setup where you can talk business with associates and friends rather than
Yeah.
your wife. Yeah.
Yeah. But she'll help with proofreading. She's very good at that. But also, try not to work on Fridays so we can have an extra day together. So just do a 4-day week. And again, it's part of trying to make the business what I want it to be, not because otherwise I might as well just go and get another job and just go and, do something else. So I want it to fit in with what I want to do and have the summers to sail and do what I want to do.
Are there any other coaches or leaders who inspire you, or somebody who's your sort of idol that you look up to, or someone's footsteps you followed in?
I think for me, because when I did my master's, you have to do a lot of research when you're doing a thesis, etc. And so it was really looking at those early pioneers who came through sort of psychological or psychology backgrounds and sociology, and really start to develop things like solution focused coaching, and then some of the other leaders who since then have taken that on and have developed their own systems. So I think there's been a number really that have really stood out, who've really helped build that pathway. So yeah, I guess I read their books and I can see the research that they did. So there's a lot of people who write books, but they aren't necessarily based on anything. So for me, it's having that credibility of, okay, so if I'm reading Clutterbuck, then I know that he was one of the main, David was one of the main exponents in terms of the research I was using. So I know that his practice is based on huge amounts of research, which was published in peer mentor, papers. And so that's got a certain level of credibility. And there's various other exponents as well who really stand out and have been super useful.
Are there many new tricks coming through the coaching business? So is there a lot of change as time goes on? Or are you able to reach into your decades of work experience and wisdom to use, which I assume you can anyway, but is there a lot of updating that you need to do?
I think the updating comes with different models that get launched. So it might be that there's a new tool that you can use for psychometric profiling, but of course what happens is the people who are rolling it out will want to pay in often several tens of thousands, thousands of pounds, to actually become trained in it, etc. So what you have to do is evaluate whether or not that's going to be something that's really going to add to your business, to say I'm an accredited trainer for this particular model, or whether or not you kind of think, well, actually I'm not sure that's going to develop enough trade specifically from having that. And again, I think it comes down to how coaching is, because it's unregulated, that it isn't super clear as to which area people can go. And what I mean by that is, so if it was really established that you absolutely had to use Colourworks psychometric profiling, everybody wanted to use that, then at that point you think, okay, I've got to do that training, that accreditation.
Right.
But if it was Clifton StrengthsFinder, then it would be that one. But because it's a general unknown, people don't know what they should be or shouldn't be looking for. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer anyway. So you end up where people just say, well, can you do some coaching? And you say yes, and I might happen to use certain models, but the customer effectively isn't coming and saying, do you fulfill this criteria, to therefore make sure that I'm only going to select you if you say yes to this question.
Or is it more like you say, okay, these are the formats I use, or these are the templates that I use, and then if they feel that it's kind of fitting their requirements, then they'll probably employ you.
Yeah. And what you're really trying to do is end up with a conversation where you say, okay, so you've got this group of people, what's the end outcome you're looking for? Because I always start at the end first, because it's like, you've got to know where you're trying to get to. So it's like, what's it going to look like at the end? And then what can we do to build that to get to that point? So if it's about increasing emotional intelligence, I'll then say, okay, we should use this type of model because we can all look at our strengths profiles, look at our areas of weakness, and then we can start building that language to actually get people to move closer towards, understanding each other. But it might be a completely different outcome they're looking for, in which case you'll say, right, okay, we need to use this model. And so it's about having a toolkit really, and the whole the whole coaching business is built on, there are lots of different strands that you could go in. So it could be you do like directive coaching, which is big in education, but actually really it's just about telling people what to do to perform quicker. So they call it coaching, but really it's mentoring, I would say. You've got neuro-linguistic programming, NLP.
Yeah.
So that's a quite a big field in itself. I mean, there are some people who use hypnotherapy as well. That's not the area I operate in, but there are multiple different ways of coaching. Some people will use a bit of mentoring and coaching, which again is really difficult. And I was talking to somebody the other day who was saying about that, and 80-20 split. And it's like, well, how do you stop them from always going, well, what do you think I should do? And that's really difficult. So there's that within coaching, there's just this whole array of different strands and interpretations as well, because even the coaches themselves may not be totally clear on what actually coaching and mentoring is, which can lead to confusion.
That's interesting. If the coach themselves are not quite clear, then potentially the client may not get the best out of the sessions. Right. So a couple of slightly more personal sort of approach to your business life. Do you have a magic formula for getting work done?
I think I'm quite success driven. So for me personally, my personality style lends itself to always achieving something every day. So I'll always make sure that every day I will achieve something. So it could be that I'm going to go to a network event. So typically for me, it might be I'll get up at 6:15. I'll start work at 7:45, do some time. Then I might go off to network event at 9, 10 o'clock, whatever it is. I'll network with the people. I'll then make sure I'm always listening. And what I'll do afterwards is I'll then post on LinkedIn and I'll say, oh, it's really great to meet, X person, super to hear about your love of horses and the fact you've got 3 horses or whatever, is appropriate. And what I want to do is I want to try and make that connection. So when I get back, I'll then put that in and put the photographs on, get that post out. And then it might be like yesterday, it was like, okay, I need to write like what I call thought piece for LinkedIn as well, about how I've worked with a client, what we did to overcome some issues, and then what they'd already tried but hadn't worked, and then what we did that did work, to then put that out. So each day it's like, okay, what am I going to try to achieve? And then I've also got a wider set of goals, like a job list that is like, okay, I've got to get this mailing list together. I've got to do these tasks. I've got to go and meet these people. I need to get into this organisation. So that every day there's always something which is there waiting to be done that I need to achieve by the end of the day.
You sound incredibly organised. My goodness. I'm green envy. And do you have a personal routine that helps your work routine?
Yes, I also build going to the gym into that as well. So 3 times a week, and I go during the daytime because at the moment I've got
Quieter.
just enough time in my schedule to fit that in. I'm sure as more clients start filling up the other blocks, then they'll get pushed to the evening sessions. But at the moment, yes, I can go in the daytime, so I get that in as well. And like I said, just get up early every day, focused, achieving stuff, going out, meeting people, or working on the next thing.
Yeah, I suppose, well, apart from the obvious that it's good to keep ourselves fit anyway, but if you're looking at sailing the Atlantic and around the world, then I suppose you need to make sure that in the next 6 years you're going to keep yourself in a proper fit condition to make sure that you're going to be able to do the sailing. Yeah,
and we're snowboarding in February as well, so that's also on my mind. So
brilliant.
Making sure I can make the most of that. So yeah.
So sticking with some personal questions, has there been a pivotal moment in your life that really shaped you into who you are today?
Yeah, so probably when I was 9.
Oh wow, okay.
And I was in I was going to school in a huge, great kind of big comprehensive, which was, I really didn't enjoy school at all. So probably a couple of years later after that. But anyway, when I was 9, I developed this love of sailing on a gravel pit, and got into racing.
On a gravel pit?
Yeah. So
please elaborate.
Yeah. So this is in Cotswolds. There's the water park there, and they're just old excavations from gravel diggings.
Okay.
Right, they fill with water, and then they use them for recreational activities. So yes, got into that, started racing, and as I progressed through school, what I realised was, although I academically wasn't that great, I could be really good at sailing. And so through the racing, it's a very tangible, because if you do well, you win. And so when you get to when you get you win in the pool that you're racing against, and then you go into wider areas and you start doing national championships and racing around the country and stuff, and then you realise I did do that, but I didn't always win. Well, in fact, I didn't ever win at full national level, but nonetheless, you still build your confidence and your self-belief. And so for me, I realised that although at school I wasn't very academically able, I had to really, really work hard to get probably quite lower results. That actually I could still be successful, but just in a slightly different arena. Later on, I did apply that to my academic studies. So by the time I finished degrees, I got good degrees.
Yeah, because you obviously mentioned already that you've got masters.
I got distinction for that one. So
there you go. What sort of age did you do your masters?
I was probably about 48, I think it was. Yeah, so not that long ago.
Major difference between going to uni in your early 20s to then doing masters in your late 40s.
Yeah.
I suppose it kind of goes back to what we are talking about here about starting a new business in later life, that you view the world so differently, and you've obviously got decades of life experience behind you. So how was that, doing your masters?
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, because I was talking about my strengths earlier, the Strengths Finder. One of the other ones is a love of learning. So it's all about trying to learn new stuff, get really into the detail of it, and really enjoy that. So for me, it was really good. I was lucky that I did my original degree in something I loved, so that really helped, and ended up getting really good outcome from that. But the masters was something that was even more interesting, and that you've got that maturity and time to be able to really think, I'm going to really go to town, and you craft these beautiful essays, which are just really interesting. How there's no truth. The basic premise of the whole academia is there is no one truth. You're just building a supporting or another argument that says it's not supported, but basically you can just look at it and you might draw a conclusion and say, well, there seems to be more evidence that this could be an outcome, but you're only waiting until the next study comes and then completely blows out of the water. So it's always that, at the moment, given the balance of all of this to evidence to support it, it's strongly likely that this could be. And for me, that really matches with my kind of, again, my learning style, my personality, that there's no truth out there. You're just going to do the best you can, and things might change, but you can adapt and you can move with it. But you're always striving to reach that higher level and to really understand or be good at something or to make something a success.
That's wonderful. And I totally share your sentiment. And I went to uni at 38.
Okay.
And basically, just like most of us really, hated school, and it's always questionable all through our lives, isn't it? Whether the school system is run right, and why do we have to learn all sorts of things that we will never ever use in our lives and just regurgitate information for exams and all the rest of it. And then later in life, you kind of start to learn different things, and you've got that life experience. And it's like, I've come to realize that I love learning. I really, really love learning. Yeah. Here I am at 50, coming to that conclusion. It's just crazy and crazy brilliant. Right, well, we've talked about a broad variety of things. The sort of quick fire round to close the interview with. Okay. Have you any regrets for not setting this business up earlier in your life?
I don't think I'm far enough into it to know that yet. So what I mean by that is, if I get to the end of 4 or 5 years and I've absolutely loved it and I'm only just beginning to really get the bones of a really successful business, I think I could easily look back then and think, oh, why didn't I do this in my 20s? But
you wouldn't have been ready for it. But
I might not have had those experiences.
A few years ago, perhaps. But
yeah,
I suppose you are still young anyway. You've still got plenty of work life left in you.
Yeah, I think so.
Would you set up another business?
Probably, yes. Yeah, so technically I've already set up another business because I did, under the advice of the accountant really, was to set up effectively like an umbrella company.
Yeah.
So Voyager Executive Coaching fits under another company, which is more generic, because I also do some writing for the marine publication kind of side of it as well. So that income will come under there. But yeah, I'm also thinking about whether or not we could utilise the yacht that we've got.
In
terms of like leadership development, etc. So it does open up an environment which for most people is really different. And
well, like literally take teams of people out on the yacht and let them work together.
Yeah, and it's a model that works when you're in near centres of really big sort of business populations. So near London, it can really work. But down the southwest, I'd need to do a bit more research as to whether or not there's enough companies, because to set that up would be a significant cost to get the boat coded and all the equipment put on extra, etc. So
and all the health and safety put in place and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so I've got the right qualifications, but it's probably something like a £10,000 investment to actually get to that point, which in 4 or 5 years that's not a lot of time to make that money back and to then start
but isn't that something, because that would be a new business that you can get a grant for or any business startup loan, because then I would imagine that would be a fairly high ticket offering from you for a team to go out for a sailing day. So theoretically the startup loan could be paid back.
Yeah, although personally I'm trying to do it with no loans, so it's all self-funded.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and I could do that. I just need to be persuaded that there's enough demand and clients that once I establish the coaching company, if we then talk about it and a number of people coming back going, actually, we've got teams of people, then I might then look at that again. But at the moment, that's probably slightly further away. And also for my wife as well, whether or not she could start a consultancy as part of her public health, because she operates at high level, and she could there's certainly parallels when you're talking about corporate structures to go in, and if you're talking about, on the one hand, the mental health and the development of the individual and teams, how does the health fit into that as well? There's a lot of synergy there, which could really help with her advising or in that capacity as to what the firm could do to increase their kind of offer around well-being or the impact, etc. It's quite a tricky area, that one. So the answer is actually increasingly yes at the moment.
Yes.
But that's because I think she's at the stage now where she knows what it is, she recognises it, and she knows that I can separate enough from that. And it's a difficult balance. But
what do you mean, like separate coaching and private?
Yeah, so as a coach, it's really hard, really hard to coach people that you love and know really, really well, because you can't, it's almost impossible to stop yourself and going, well, why are you saying that? Like, of course you're brilliant, like, or whatever the thing is, So it's really difficult to not do that. So when you're coaching somebody, it has to be understood on both sides as to So I'll just ask the question and then she'll. But then
you could literally be standing in the kitchen having a cup of coffee, and you could just ask a question that could be interpreted as a coaching question.
It can be.
When do you catch her to make sure that she doesn't interpret it that way, or actually.
And I think she's aware of it enough to know exactly what's going on. And also, you don't want to trick people, so it's just like, well, if I ask you a coaching question, what about if I say this, and then it's very clear what's going on. So
that's
but that's a tricky one. I don't think there are many coaches that coach their partners really. So.
No, probably best not. Yeah, I think that's a rabbit hole to go down on, isn't it, if you start coaching each other. Right, so just to help along our listeners with some business advice, do you read any particular books, or do you listen to any particular podcast that you would recommend for people who are either in business or in coaching business?
Yeah. So I did very little research when I decided to set up my business. So I'm probably a really poor person to ask, because I can't say I've read all of these business books, etc.
We do it all as we go along, don't we?
Because I have a strong belief in myself, and it's difficult to be a coach and not have that, because you always think, well, there's always a solution, isn't there? All I've got to do is ask myself, because you do a lot of self-coaching. Don't talk it out loud. But you can...
Why not? You are the best person to talk to. I talk to myself out loud all the time.
So I very much felt I'm going to draw on the expertise of other people. So haven't got a problem with the mentoring and people telling me what they think, but I'm always going to evaluate that and weigh that up.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to think about, okay, what am I going to do today? What's the next thing? What's the plan, etc. But I did have a book recommended to me from a friend who he found it really useful in setting up his business, which was the E-Myth. It's an American book, but it is useful. It does break things down into, just because you're technically good at something, they're saying this typical, you become really good at printing, so you think, oh, okay, I'm going to run a printing business. And then, of course, the skill set you've got for being a printer has got nothing to do with running a business.
Yeah.
So it's about breaking it down into sort of 3 different areas, and then making sure that you're either doing each of those yourself, or you eventually get people in to do the entrepreneurial stuff or the technical stuff.
That sounds very good. A very good overall business advice book.
Yeah,
Do you
I think
remember the author? Or
I did make a note because my memory isn't always going to support me. So that was, it's Michael Gerber.
Okay.
So Michael Gerber, The E-Myth.
The E-Myth.
The E-Myth,
okay.
yeah. So it's about entrepreneurialism. And then podcasts, it's a specific one for coaching, but it's Jump Into Success by Tony Nutley, who runs the UK College of Personal Development. So basically another coach, but he gets other coaches in and they talk about coaching and different techniques and stuff, and that's quite useful. So
hopefully that'll be useful for any coaches listening to this
I think
episode.
so, yeah. So yeah, it's been interesting. So
wonderful. Yeah. So that concludes our conversation today. Can I just say that it's been really eye-opening to learn about the difference between mentoring and coaching. That's absolutely fantastic. I've taken a lot away from that.
Great.
So thank you, Kris, for coming on the show. And of course, all of your contact details will be in the show notes for any listeners to be able to reach you should they require your services.
That's great.
Thank you for coming on the show. I'm thankful to Kris for sharing his insights on leadership and coaching. At New Business in Later Life, we believe that your years of expertise are invaluable in guiding others. If you've been contemplating starting a business, let Kris's story empower you to trust in your abilities and take action. I hope Kris's journey has inspired you to consider how your professional experience could translate into a coaching career. For those interested in Kris's services, you'll find his information in the show notes. Thank you.